That's close enough. Okay, hi everyone, I'm Nathan Peterman. I'm a grad student at Oregon State University, and I've been working on reinforcement learning for bipedal robots. So our structure is pretty basic. So PPO is our policy update. We train in simulation with dynamics randomization, and we do what's called zero-shot transfer. So you might say, hey, why are you training in simulation when the best environment is the real world? Unfortunately, with bipedal robots, at least full-size ones, you can't just randomly send motion commands to the robot without breaking it. So, for example, if it falls over, even Cassie, which is pretty robust, will take some damage, or doing 200 newton meters or more at the knee could cause damage to the ground or the robot. So basically, we do a bunch of simulations, and then we have to transfer it to the real robot, and it has to work the first time. We can't afford the chance of damaging the robot. So what we use, next slide. So one of the inputs we use into our policy network is a clock function. So we came up with a way to reward and penalize the foot based on if it's in stance or swing. And this is good because it gives us control over the gait of the robot. You can actually write a reward function for bipedal robots that's just like, get the max velocity of the torso. And if you set some good termination conditions, you can kind of get walking. But if you want to be able to control the walking, make the robot skip, make the robot jump, you can actually use the swing stance and vary these, shown on the next slide. That these correspond to left swing, double stance, left stance, and you vary kind of like the swing to stance ratio to get more of a running gait, for example. So this is an example. So this is, Cassie is completely blind, so there are no vision sensors of any type. So this is Cassie running outside up some stairs that it cannot see. So it thinks it's walking on level ground. You can see in some steps it actually catches the edge or stubs its toe, and we've trained the policy to be robust against that. So this is not really a change in the reward function, this is a change in the simulation environment. We trained it with steps in the environment. And the story behind this one is a student at the time, Jonah, meant to put vision data in the simulation, but realized he forgot to connect it to the controller. So, he made this really great breakthrough completely by accident, making a robot that can walk upstairs completely blind. This was in the news, I think, a little bit over a year ago, but we actually had Cassie run, might not be the correct word, but 2 meters per second walk a 5K, so a 5K marathon. And so this is actually footage from a practice run on a turf field. You can see we've already done 40 minutes of walking outside without a tether, without falling. And this is our best lap, 2.15 meters per second. And then we actually did a run outside that we filmed and we put up on YouTube. But once again, not too many changes to the reward function. We noticed during testing that the foot soles were wearing down because we were running so much. So we actually added a term, a reward term, to reduce force when contacting the ground. One that made the robot much quieter, but also reduced the wear on the sole, which is what we found we needed when we were going for such long distance. This is just another policy, and once again, very similar reward function, and we put unsensed loads on it. So Cassie does not know that those loads are there. Just in the simulation environment, we put these loads. And for example, we simulated them with springs or something in Majoko. I don't have it in this clip, but for example, that 5 kilogram metal cube at the top of Cassie falls off while it's walking. And it doesn't know, it keeps going. And then Jeremy Dow, whose paper this is, just grabs it and puts it back on, and the robot keeps walking. So after we started to do that, I would say, just started working with vision. So Cassie is totally blind. But in this example, we put a camera up in our lab to read April tags and kind of add these stepping stones, or some people call them lily pads. So this video is slowed down, but it's actually using RL to place the foot where those pads are.
You're good.
Yep. And this is our most recent thing that you might have seen. once again, using similar reward function, we made Cassie run the 100-meter dash. So this one's interesting because to run the 100-meter dash, you have to start standing still and then end standing still. And if anyone's done reinforcement learning, it's very hard to get a robot to stand still. So this is actually a practice run, so this is not the one that we shared on YouTube. So this completes the 100-meter dash in just under, or just above 24 seconds. You can see there's some pretty significant aerial phase in its walking, and it's pretty natural looking, even if we're steering it with a joystick. And it's hard to perceive how fast it is, but I can tell you, from experience that it was, I'm a little out of shape. It's a little hard for me to keep up with the robot at that speed. So this is the average speed over the whole 100-meter dash is 4 meters per second. So Cassie was actually running faster than that. So for my final slide, so it's been about a year since that video came out. We were really happy with how much exposure it got, but we've been doing a lot of work just refactoring our software. We got a new robot, so we received a Digit, which is pretty similar to Cassie, but with arms. And so we're trying to switch to doing bimanual manipulation, so using those arms to move boxes. Digit does not have a traditional end effector that can close on an object, so we basically have to use both fingers to hold closely. And as we do this, we're struggling with training time. We're using Majoko, which runs on the CPU, and adding vision to this mix is making the problem much worse. And we've looked into using Isaac Gym, but it does not support the closed loops that make up Digit's and Cassie's legs, so we're trying to work around that. So we're trying to work through a lot of things at once, and we're kind of moving away from making Cassie run really fast and do sick jumps. And we're trying to move towards doing useful work in our lab with Digit, which I think will still be very cool to do an RL box policy. So that's it for my presentation. I'll take questions.
You mentioned symptom at the same time you said that you have a very precise robot model, so you don't really worry so much about this step.
So what we do...
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So the question was, you mentioned SimDeBriel and having a precise robot model. How do you transfer that successfully? So our robot model is pretty precise. We simulate the springs in Cassie, but the hardware does not match exactly the design, the CAD design that it was made to. So we actually vary all these parameters in our simulation. So we're, changing joint dampening, joint mass, ground friction, ground slopes, and joint cutter offset. So those are just some of the things that we kind of add noise. I wouldn't say add noise. We vary just to get better performance and get that transfer to work the first time. So it's no simulation is really perfectly accurate.
Is that what you mean by dynamics randomization?
Yes, so this is dynamics randomization. So not just using the value that's in your model of the robot, it's using values around it.
Does your controller have internal state variables or no?
As far as I know, we've tried doing, we're working on it.
I guess my question is, is your controller robust to these perturbations, or is it a controller that reinforcement learning has a learning part to it?
Oh no, it's all reinforcement learning, so the whole thing is
I know
robust.
the reinforcement learning could have state variables, could have.
Yeah,
state,
You said you have LSTM, right?
Mhm.
So you have state.
Yeah. Yeah,
what's
sorry.
it- so
Yes,
An LSTM layer has state.
yeah.
it has states, which means that your state estimation is actually part of what you learned in the reinforcement learning.
Oh yeah, I actually forgot. Yeah, so that is, we are learning state estimation in that. I'd say one of the things is Cassie had a agility provided state estimator that was running that was not RL learned. And so one of the things we recently did is we got rid of that so that Digit does not have that provided code. So we're not using a traditional state estimator.
No, I didn't really
Okay.
mean state estimation, I meant parameter estimation.
Yes. Okay.
You don't have any, as far as I understand, you don't have any rewards or anything in the structure set up to explicitly encourage that, so it might be doing that, it might not. But it would be possible to do that with the structure they have, because they do have state. Whether that state's actually doing that or not, hard to tell in this case.
So just to get something clear, I haven't tried myself, but I've heard of getting the right model to be correct or useful for Muyoko is truly hard. So you got around that by getting a decent model that you got and then doing the variation.
Yeah, so
Was that the key to the zero shutdown transfer to Muyoko?
yeah, so decent model was provided by Agility Robotics, when they made Cassie, and they spent time trying to make it work because that's what they did their traditional controller in. And then on top of that, there's robot-to-robot variation. There's about 12 Cassies made, so the randomization helps with that as well. Yes.
Is there a clock input to the controller, or is that only in the reward?
There's a clock input into the. Sorry, what was the question? Into the reward or?
Is there a clock input into the controller
Yes, there's.
during operation?
Yeah.
So it knows what time it is?
Yes.
And that's important to the controlling function?
Yes.
Got it.
Antonio, I think you had a question?
I had many, but most of them were answered.
I have one.
But yeah, one main question was, how did you make the sim-to-real transfer successful? But you partially answered it. The other question was, is LSTM really needed, or just a stack of RAM was enough? And how long maybe did you take to iterate between having simulation working until having the real world working?
Okay, so that was before. So the question was about the LSTM and how long did it take before having the simulation, getting the walking working. That was before my time in the lab, so I can't quite answer that.
Okay.
But I can ask around the lab and get back to you about that.
Having seen Antonio's presentation yesterday, and your main concern with not doing RL on the hardware is that if it falls down, it will fall down a lot. Does it make sense then to actually train with a bunch of reward functions that really just emphasize stability, and then you train for a different set of rewards that emphasize performance directly on the robot once it can actually move?
I think it's a really interesting research path to start with simulation and then learn more on the robot. It's a bit worrying because we've only done InSim. When we switch reward functions, sometimes it will kind of, we call it unlearn. We start with a standing policy and then teach because we're trying to move boxes around now, we teach a arm move policy. It usually works for a while and then slowly it just falls over, it forgets the first policy. So there's some weird things with that, but I think maybe the best way is to actually combine the approaches. So you learn a base policy with dynamics randomization, and then you kind of learn on the robot even more. And I think you would get the best performance that way.
I have one more question while who is setting up this. Now we saw that zero shot, this is zero shot, right?
Yep.
Sim to real works perfectly well, it works very, very well, which is
Yeah.
And you find a controller that's almost agnostic to, or somewhat agnostic to the actual robot, right? What do you think how much you can gain if you combine what you have, your zero shot sim to real with the Antonion's approaches, where you learn the actual dynamics of the robot, so you can run 6 meters.
So I think, for example, because I'm actually mostly a hardware guy, as you can see by the lack of MPC in my presentation. For example, I know specifically we hypothesize that there are two things limiting our max speed of Cassie, and one is the physical hardware. There's a lot of backlash in the joint, and then the model is not as bad as it is on our specific Cassie. We've actually run it on 2 different Cassies, and it varies a little bit. So I think with his method, it could maybe learn that it cannot trust that command as much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.